Prior to discussing any of the technical aspects of the VMware Cloud on AWS service, it is important to first review some of the core concepts. Firstly, we'll discuss the customer-owned AWS account, which is a prerequisite for activating the service and is required in order to enable access to AWS services. Secondly, we'll cover the Cloud Services Organization, otherwise known as the org. The org represents a top-level construct within VMware Cloud and acts as a central object for the management of all cloud services. Next, we'll discuss the Software-Defined Data Center, or SDDC, which represents a self-contained private cloud. Lastly, we'll cover the topic of connecting an SDDC to AWS services. A major value proposition of VMware Cloud on AWS is its ability to provide direct access to AWS services. As such, it is required that all customers maintain a dedicated AWS account, which will be used to access and manage these services. A few important points on this account. Firstly, the account is required since it provides a means of enabling access to AWS services from a customer's VMware Cloud resources. Secondly, the account is owned by the customer, not by VMware. This is an important point since billing for AWS services are handled directly by AWS and not by VMware. The Cloud Services Organization may be thought of as a top-level construct within VMware Cloud. In the context of this specific service, it may be thought of as the object which contains SDDCs. Within VMware Cloud exists the notion of users. Users are associated with one or more orgs, and within each org, a user will have one of two roles, either an org owner or an org user. Org users have the ability to manage resources within the org. In other words, they have the ability to create and delete SDDCs, add and remove hosts from an SDDC, and configure networking and security policies for the SDDC. Org owners have all of these same privileges, but they have the additional ability to manage users within the org. Today, this is the only major differentiator between the two roles. It is important to note that users are only relevant within the VMware Cloud Services console. They do not reflect user accounts within vCenter of an individual SDDC. Within each org is a special user known as the fund owner. The fund owner is responsible for providing funding for VMware Cloud services and is responsible for activating the org and adding the other users. It is important that the fund owner have all required fields of their My VMware account profile fully populated and that they have adequate funds associated with that profile. This is a requirement in order to activate the service. It is also important to note that an org is activated via a single-use activation link which is sent by email. The email address used for this purpose is the one provided within the fund owner's My VMware profile. Therefore, it is very important that this email address be that of a recipient who is prepared to handle the activation email. The Software-Defined Data Center, or SDDC, is a collection of bare metal hosts which are installed with a standard set of VMware software, which is configured and deployed in a prescriptive manner. It is important to call out the fact that each SDDC is provisioned on dedicated hardware. As such, billing is based on the hardware itself and not the VMs which reside on the SDDC. Essentially, this means that you pay for the hardware for as long as it is provisioned, no matter how many or how few VMs are deployed to an SDDC. It is also important to note the permissions model of VMware Cloud on AWS. Since it is a managed service, full admin access is not granted to an SDDC. Instead, customers are given a role which allows them to fully manage workloads which they have deployed within an SDDC. Normally, this permissions model does not impact day-to-day use of the service. However, it is important to keep in mind if you are planning on integrating tools directly with vCenter. If the integration you are planning requires admin rights to vCenter, then it may not function properly. Each SDDC is provided direct access to AWS services via connection to a customer-owned AWS account, and this connection is established as part of the SDDC provisioning process. The term connected simply means that the customer has granted permissions for the VMware Cloud on AWS service to enable routing between an SDDC and a VPC within the connected account. These permissions are granted via IAM roles, which are created within the connected account using a CloudFormation template. It is important that the person who is performing the account connection process have sufficient permissions within the AWS account to execute this CloudFormation template. Once the SDDC is connected to the AWS account, it then becomes possible to configure a cross-VPC link between the SDDC and a VPC within the connected account. The cross-linking itself is implemented via a series of elastic network interfaces which provide a direct network path between hosts of the SDDC and a subnet within the connected account. Both the VPC and subnet used for this cross-linking are chosen by the customer during the SDDC provisioning process. It is important to keep the following considerations in mind when selecting a VPC and subnet for this cross-linking. Firstly, the VPC must exist within the same AWS region as is planned for the SDDC, and the subnet must be sufficiently large to accommodate one ENI per host within the SDDC. Typically, a /26 is the minimum recommended size for the subnet. Secondly, it is important to remember that subnets are associated with an availability zone, or AZ. Therefore, the choice of subnet determines the AZ into which the hosts of the SDDC are provisioned. The purpose of this is to avoid cross-AZ bandwidth charges between the SDDC and the subnet used for cross-linking. However, please note that if the SDDC needs to communicate to resources in other subnets, then cross-AZ bandwidth charges may apply if the destination subnet resides within a different AZ. This is illustrated in the diagram below. In the diagram, subnet 1 is used for cross-linking, and since the SDDC, subnet 1, and subnet 2 all reside within the same AZ, no cross-AZ bandwidth charges would apply to communications between them. However, subnet 3 resides within a different AZ. Therefore, communications between the SDDC and subnet 3 would incur bandwidth charges which would be billed directly to the customer-owned AWS account. A third consideration is that we recommend the use of a dedicated subnet for cross-linking. The reason for this is to ensure that IP addresses within the subnet are not consumed by other services, thus preventing ENIs for new hosts from being added as the SDDC grows. Additionally, using a dedicated subnet helps prevent this situation where an AWS admin accidentally deletes or otherwise modifies the ENIs used for cross-linking. As a final note, it is possible to connect multiple SDDCs to a single account. If you plan to do this, then it is vital to ensure that you do not create IP addressing conflicts through the use of overlapping IP address ranges between the SDDCs. This is particularly relevant if you plan to cross-link multiple SDDCs to the same VPC. Thank you for watching. For more information on this as well as other VMware Cloud services, please visit us at cloud.vmware.com. Thanks again.